مرحبا، أنا عمران دقنيش. في 2016 رأيتني في سيارة إسعاف لما كان عمري 3 سنوات فقط. اليوم أنا في 7 من عمري وأنا بشكل جيد في حلب. أختي رؤى وأختي الصغيرة تقي في حالة جيدة. أخي عبد الله يبلغ من العمر 8 أعوام تقريبا. والدي هو محمد خير وهو أيضا بخير، ووالدتي أيضا بخير الآن. أردنا إخبار كل من صلى من أجلنا. شكرا لكم، ونحن أيضا نحبكم جميعا.
Should never allow the government to decide what is acceptable speech and what is unacceptable speech. We should penalize behaviors, not opinions, and not speech. If you start trying to regulate speech, you start trying to regulate thoughts, start trying to regulate beliefs rather than behaviors, there's no way that you're not going to abridge the constitutional rights of millions of Americans.
أهلا، أنا عمران دقنيش. لقد رأيتني في سيارة الإسعاف في حلب. عندما أطاحت الطيارات الجوية بمنزل عائلتي. أنا بأمان الآن. أردت أن أجيب على تساؤل شخص ما حول مشاعري عن نفسي وعن عائلتي عن طريق قول أنا بخير وأنا أحبك أيضا يا ديفيد.
This portion of the UFO channel is brought to you by the Socialist New World Order, making your life much sadder through submission to authority, enslavement under oppression, and a complete hatred for others through conformity to the proletariat. You won't be happy because we'll make your life that way.
Time great. When you want pure milk chocolate, with or without almonds, nothing but a Hershey bar will do. One of the old-time greats.
Pure milk chocolate, with or without almonds. Hershey's, one of the all-time greats.
On today's episode, we're going to be discussing a series of different subjects, specifically on paranormal encounters, and then winding it up with another interesting story from some 80 years ago, and that relates to the sighting of a unidentified flying object by my mother in 1944, 1943, and we'll try to describe as much details of what she saw as possible.
The night after all this had happened, I was sat in here by myself, and it was about 9-10 o'clock at night. I was watching something like News at 10 on the television, and I felt really sort of as though I'd lost something or somebody, you know, when you lose a member of the family and you get that horrible gut feeling, and I had tears rolling down my face for some reason. And I was crying. I was sat here crying, and I didn't know the reason why. And obviously I knew it had something to do with what had happened, so I rang Peter up and asked him what he thought it was. And he said, of course you're going to feel like this for a couple of days afterwards, because what he'd got rid of has been around for 250 odd years. And at that point I decided that I wanted to really find out a little bit more about who he was or what he was. Started asking Peter some questions, and he just started rattling it off. It was like he was talking to somebody up there.
I was in an Arby's restaurant, and you know Arby's, of course, has roast beef and all the rest of it. Well, I went into the restaurant one day, and I got myself, I think I had a French dip and potato cakes and a drink, and I went back to my seat, and I started eating. And the same exact thing happened to me. I just was sitting there eating, and all of a sudden, I just felt that kind of extreme sense of loss, of just total sadness, despair, and I started crying myself. And I can remember only the fact that while I was crying, I looked over towards one of the entrances of the restaurant, and there was a couple that had come in. It was an elderly couple, a man and a woman. And when I heard this guy's experience of the fishermen having crossed over, and then myself experiencing the exact same thing of all places at a restaurant, at an Arby's, I thought, could it be that one of these elderly people projected that feeling to me, or was the fact that a spirit had come into the restaurant and I felt the projection of this spirit in the restaurant? Maybe it was saying it couldn't cross over, or it was not at peace with itself, or somehow or another I felt that projection of that loss of this individual, whoever it was, but I never made out any kind of a name during the experience. I never could detect who was it that I was having this deep sense of despair, because when you hear it from somebody else and it's exactly the same thing, you know it's not a coincidence. It had to be the same kind of experience as this man that had this projection of that spirit's loss, that it made him cry too. And the the fact of the matter is, what you heard in the video I showed earlier, this guy was feeling like initially it's over, the spirit's at peace, it's moved on, and then he feels this sense of loss. Now, it could have been an after effect, a telepathic or telepathy of the spirit saying, I will miss this place that I loved, as far as where his house was now built. But what I experienced in the restaurant, who knows, maybe somebody had died there years ago on that property before they built the restaurant, because it's actually in a plaza where Walmart is. Maybe all of that at one time was like a residential area. Maybe somebody was buried over that restaurant or under the restaurant, and their spirit projected itself to me, and that's why I felt it at that moment in time. Now, these are just speculations, but if he felt that from the fact that the spirit had moved on after the medium had convinced him to move on, then something about that restaurant at Arby's, something had happened there, and I felt that outreach by something, by a spirit or some disembodied entity in that restaurant, sent something out to me. I don't know, but I leave that to your own interpretation of what it was I might have sensed at that moment.
What about people whose soul and spirit are in hell? You remember Jesus talking to a group of religious leaders one time, and he talked about that they would receive the greater damnation. Why? Because they had knowledge and were willfully rejecting it. They had understanding of who he was, but they purposely and willfully allowed their traditions to be stronger than what their faith was. So the Bible says, where little is known, require. Where much is known, much is required. And so I believe, based on not only Scripture, but people that have had experiences, life after death experiences, and maybe they've seen into the underworld, they've seen these chambers. I believe, for example, Tartarus, where the fallen angels are, is truly the lowest part of hell. I believe the lowest part of hell, which is the worst compartments of torment, are where people like terrorists go, people that are mass murderers go, individuals who have done terrible, terrible crimes against humanity. Adolf Hitler is there in the lowest part of hell. However, what about people who maybe did not have a covenant with the Lord? They were good people, but they had no relationship. They had a knowledge, but they didn't receive it. I still believe that there is a compartment of the underworld called Gehenna or hell. However, the punishment for a person who didn't have the knowledge would be a lesser level of punishment than the person who knew more. There's so many scriptures in the Bible. For example, someone that teaches the Word is much more responsible than someone who doesn't teach the Word. So what you know and what you do, it connects into your level of responsibility and knowledge you have with Christ. Now, that doesn't lessen the fact, let me say this, that, just the fact that, I wouldn't be so worried much about the fire that would be in hell as I would be the separation. The Bible talks about weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth, because, ladies and gentlemen, to not have your grandkids, to not have your kids, to not see your children again, to not see trees, to not see beautiful waterfalls, to not see the beautiful land that God has created, but just to be in a chamber which is like an eternal prison, that alone would be enough to say, I'd rather not go there. But the good news is, this is why God sent Christ, to give you a covenant with Almighty God.
He was doing a series about Journey to the Underworld, and he was talking about how the Bible makes very specific references to underground caverns deep in the earth, and he says these are locations of where those who have died, their spirits go there. And he implied, of course, that in most instances this is Hades. This is various references to hell that is mentioned in the Bible, and they give it all kinds of different names. Shiloh, Ganymede, or something like that. It's like there's all these different names. And when I heard him talking about this, he said that people who have had near-death experiences have similar experiences. Those who are unsaved, they go to a place like this that's very deep underground. You don't feel like you're not in our world, because he says there's no light around you. There's no sense of life at all. And that's the experience of I had an out of body experience I've shared in other videos about. I'm crawling in a very, very tight crawl space under a house. I'm kind of snaking my way through very, very dense rock around me. And then eventually I come to an opening above me. And it's basically a crawl space opening into another place. It became to me, I saw an office. And of course, that has nothing to do with a house, but it was two specific places. And anyway, when I went into this room, there were no doors. There was no way to get out of it. It was very, very dim lit. There were sheetrock walls around me. There was an old fax machine, a copy machine, and other things. And I say these are symbolic references to possibly the third heaven that Perry Stone mentions. And he had said in the video about the fact that these places that people go after death make references to the underworld, meaning places very, very deep in the earth itself, even beyond it just being, brimstone, sulfur, because he brought out the fact that the most lowest place in the world is the Dead Sea, and that's not too far from Israel, from Jerusalem. And he said these are places where there's definite entrances into those locations, or those deep underground caverns, where he said this is the bottomless pit where the Antichrist will be released after 1,000 years when Jesus returns. And these are other areas where the fallen angels reside right now. They reside there because when God cast them out of heaven, they were thrown into deep chasms underground. Chasms are, deep abysses, places where you can't get out. Even as a spirit, it's sort of like for them a trapped area. They can't get out of it. And I thought it was relevant to my own experience, my out-of-body experience, have very similar feelings and impressions and symbolic references of where I was, But the third heaven is not heaven per se, the heaven we know where God resides, and it's not hell itself, because the third heaven is supposed to be paradise. This is where all people went after death, prior to Jesus dying on the cross, and he said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." It means he raptured out, or he liberated paradise. He liberated all the people that were there in that place between heaven and earth. And according to Perry Stone, paradise itself is actually part of these underground caverns, or these deep abysses in the earth. And I just, when I heard him talking about it, I thought that this is really going to be interesting. People will want to know about this.
Then the older brother was named Buddy. He was a couple of years younger than me. They both run in the house. And I looked up, and of course I had no idea what that was. But he sure did shine a light down, whatever it was. And he hovered over there a couple of minutes, and finally I went in, and Lily and let's see, Rosa was in there, and Mitchell Merrill was in there, and they were questioning Tommy and Buddy about, why are you so scared? And so Buddy had already told them, there's something hovering over there and it's shining a light down. And Mitchell said, oh, y'all get the bag in that. And I said, no, I'm not going to say anything because they know that I lost my mind, you know. I said, well, yeah, I think I've seen a light. And then when we went back out there, guess what? He wasn't there no more. He was not there no more. I didn't hear no sound. I just wonder if their memories are still like my memories. You know what? I'm sure Tommy's still alive, and I guess Buddy is. You know what? First couple of times I've seen it, I didn't tell Bonnie. You know? Because I thought, well, maybe he thinks he saw them lined up, you know. Yeah, I had seen it several times before. And then one morning we was on our way to work again, going down there. And that same road. And I told her, I said, well, I've been wanting to tell you this, but I've been seeing, you know, what I've been seeing. I said, so you have to kind of slow down. And I told her, I said, look at the edge of the whiskey. And it's right there at where they had the big antennas, you know, for the parlor, whatever, you know, cable TV. They had these big cable, there were antennae for that area to get cable TV. And I told her, I said, do you see all these rabbits lined up? They weren't touching each other, you know, there was so much space in between them. And she's not even believing it, because at first she didn't see it. Then she did. You know, I said, I never seen nothing like that before. You know? They were standing up on their hind legs and their arms like that. They were on their haunches, and the front legs were up.
You said they just stared straight ahead. They didn't actually watch you go down.
No, they were like in a trance, and they were just like standing like that and looking straight ahead.
And this is many years before the very first practical helicopters were ever created. This is right during the time of the Second World War, before the days like of Normandy, the end of the like the Hiroshima bombing and all the rest of it. This is during the key time between Pearl Harbor and VJ Day, or Normandy, the invasion. She said, I'm outside with a couple of my friends, and we're out playing near the house. And she said, all of a sudden, it was really getting dark. And she said she looked up, and there was a light that shined straight down at her and these other friends of hers. She wasn't more than maybe 9 or 10 years old, and she said there was no sound at all. There was no sound of a helicopter. There was no noise at all. And she said it just came out of nowhere. The light shined down, and she said it definitely was some kind of a spotlight. And she said when we saw it, it kind of scared us, but she said we figured, what is this thing? So she ran back to the house with her friends, and they told their parents, and they thought, oh, you're imagining things. But she had said that this was definitely during the time right after Pearl Harbor, so it was around 1942, 1943, somewhere in that frame of mind or time frame. And according to history, helicopters did not exist until the late 40s, because that's when the very first practical helicopters, the first real experiments were done. It was right after the end of World War II. So this could not have been a helicopter, because it was before the time they developed it. And then number two, there was no sound. So she said I could not hear any kind of a rotor sound or any kind of a motor running or anything. She said it was just totally silent. And the spotlight shined down, and she said I looked at it and I thought, now what could that be? But it didn't. She said it didn't scare her, and so she went back in and then told her grandmother, and the other two boys also told their parents. And anyway, she didn't say that they went back out to look for it again. They didn't go back after that, but there were at least 2 other witnesses besides her who saw this. And when she describes it every time, it sounds like initially it's a helicopter. It hovered in the sky. It didn't shoot down like a falling star. She said it just appeared and it shined down on the ground, but nothing hit the ground. There was no noise, and she said it just kind of like it just was levitating there in the sky. And so, to me, that can't be either a helicopter, it can't be a meteor, it can't be a falling star, it can't be an asteroid, or anything, astronomically, or astrologically, it can't be anything like that. But, I've always been impressed by the fact she saw it that early on, even before you had the first real reports of UFO activity, like in 1947 with Roswell, or any of these other things that have happened since. And she saw it 4 or 5 years even before the events in Roswell happened. So I wanted to bring that up again in this video to show people that UFO sightings were happening from the time of the 1800s and on, except that most weren't given the kind of publicity as Kenneth Arnold, the one that saw the UFOs skipping like rocks off the mountains. I think that was somewhere in Washington State. He never photographed them, but did illustrations and so forth. That was really the first time people heard about UFOs, unidentified flying objects. But she'd seen it 4 or 5 years before that, so that was, to me, really interesting. But I hope you guys found this interesting today, and I hope to do more videos in the future. But as you know, the social media platforms are wiping away our individual rights of free speech. They have already hit my channel with 2 strikes. And why? It wasn't because of anything that I said that was vulgar. It was because of the fact I bring up subjects that the communists don't want us talking about. The election, the fact about the riots that took place. I said, would the military come to our defense when they see that there's a definite taking over of our country by communism? And YouTube said that violated their community guidelines to bring up any subject that they don't agree with. Not that it would have incited anybody. It just was a simple question. And they struck it off my channel, and they gave me a strike. Now, if they take my channel down, I'm not going to be the only one, because everybody else on YouTube is under the same exact harassment by YouTube now. And if they if they knock down enough people off YouTube, I promise you it's going to become just like Facebook and Twitter. Everybody will take their channels down. They'll close them. And then they won't have any money coming in except for the big shot companies that promote either their products on YouTube or the celebrities or whoever. But the rest of the people, the average American citizen, if we are stripped away our freedoms and our rights, there won't be anybody who will watch any of the videos, because they're going to know, what's the point of watching any channel when they can potentially strip it and just totally shut it down? And to me, that's just absolutely ridiculous, that our Constitution is supposed to protect our freedoms and our rights to say what we want. And now the communists are saying, no, you don't have that right anymore. We're going to take it away from you. We're going to strip away every opportunity you might have had to say anything. Because if you say something we don't agree with, we have the right to take it down. Well, I say this to all social media platforms. When my sister was murdered in 1983, we did word of mouth to every person we knew, and we told them how Winn-Dixie treated us. And now Winn-Dixie as a company does not really exist anymore. It might have a few stores out northwest, but that was word of mouth. That was not using the internet. That was not using social media, because at that time there was nothing. So you, as an American, have the right of free speech, whether it be through texting other people on your phone or other means of communication. And the social media can't do squat. They can't restrict you from talking one-on-one with other people. And guess what? It still had a definite impact on society, because people learned what had happened to my sister and the 4 customers that died in that store. So never believe that because social media takes down your rights of free speech, you cannot still talk about something outside the scope of what the military or the government itself controls of what you can say. You have other ways to communicate. Writing letters, texting people, talking one-on-one with people. There are other ways to communicate besides social media. So I'd say do it. Get out and spread the word of what the socialists, what the liberals, and the Communist Party of the Democrats are doing, how they're stripping away our individual rights of free speech, our rights of freedom of expression. Because when they strip it away, they're going to find out people aren't going to use their services anymore, and then they're going to be out of business. And then they have only themselves to blame for that, because then they're not going to be having any kind of income to keep themselves running. Twitter has already lost people like Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, several hundred people are closing their channels on Facebook and Twitter because they're saying you can't talk about something we don't approve of. It has nothing to do with incitement. It has to do with them deliberately restricting your constitutional rights of free speech. And they're saying you can't talk about that anymore. You can't talk about that. You can't speak of that, whatever it might be. That is total liable lawsuit issues, that they're saying your constitutional rights mean nothing because they don't exist. That's what YouTube is saying. That's what all these social media outlets are saying. You don't have rights to speak out. And I say, if the Constitution doesn't exist, then it means that the United States and the American flag itself doesn't exist, and they should take it down and put up either a swastika over the nation's capital, or they should put up a hammer and a sickle representing China, representing Russia, because it means the United States and its people don't have freedom anymore. And that to me is just tantamount. That's why they hated Trump so much, because he was trying to bring our freedoms back. And the Democrats were condemning him every single day. They still do it. Even though he isn't president anymore, they still laugh at him. They still put him down. They still condemn him. As an American citizen, you should be outraged that they can do that thing, anything, against another American citizen, that they can tell you what you can say and what you can't say. Because when they're doing that and you're not taking any kind of action to stand up for yourself, you're saying, I don't care. There's a lot of people who do care. 75 million people voted for President Trump, even though the Democrats say it doesn't matter. I say it does matter. And if they try and tell you to your face, you can't say that, you can't have that on your car anymore, folks, somebody's going to be dying. There's going to be a lot of people being shot down when the Democrats and the socialists start telling you what you can say and not say, and they start telling you, get that off your car, you can't say that anymore. guess what? Something's going to happen. I hope it's going to be that the American people speak out and stand up for themselves instead of cowering to the democratic socialists, to the communists, because the time is way past us doing something as an Americans. We should be doing something about this. We should be saying, this is not going to hold, this is not going to stand, we're not going to allow it anymore, and we should speak out. And all those blacks that protested during the Black Lives Matter and all that crap, y'all might be laughing and having a fun old time, but when those socialist communists take those freedoms away from you, you're not going to be dancing in the streets anymore. You're going to be doing anything, because you're going to be in the same boat as the whites and all the rest of this country. You're going to be in the same exact situation. So I just hope everybody who watches this video, which could be my last one, you know right now, if you don't stand up for your freedoms, you give them away to the communists. You give them away to the socialists. This is not a conspiracy. This is reality. This is happening now in this country. And it's way, way time for you to take an initiative and a stand for what you believe in, what you are, who you are, and don't let them take it away from you. Don't ever give up to the communists. Never give up to the socialists or the liberals. The liberals are behind everything that has happened in this country.
No part of this program may be reproduced, copied, manipulated, or distributed under the copyright laws of this socialist world order country. Anyone violating this law will be subject to corporal punishment. Tortures incurred would including a paddling, a spanking, a whipping, or a beating at the discretion of your dictatorship magistrate office. In the North American Union it would be under the stipulation of Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, Barack Hussein Obama's minions.
From Omram and Carey Films comes this true and tragic story of a small 3.5-year-old boy who lived in Aleppo, Syria. His name is Amram Daknish. He was seen one night in an ambulance with blood on his head. His family survived the worst night of their lives when Russian airstrikes destroyed his neighborhood. The world saw him, cried for him, remembers him today. The famous director George Lucas brings this story to life in a way you will never forget because it really happened. Rated PG-13.